Hi, folks, and welcome to Thursday Parsha. It's in honor of Michla Bas Moshe, Sarah Razel Bas Etelchana, Shlomo Yitzchak ben Moshe, and Yitzchak ben Shimon. I posted a question today on Facebook. Was Korach, who is the hero or anti-hero, depending on how you look at it, of this week's Torah portion, was Korach the first Democrat? And then just a couple of minutes ago, put a post onto Instagram stating why the left is right and the right left, and saying that it's more subtle than we think. What I want to do today is look at that and explore the notion of left and right, specifically according to the tree of life, and then see how that plays out in terms of political parties, affiliations, the consciousness that is underlying those who belong to different parties, to the left and right, the Democrats and Republicans in America, and then bring that back to a discussion about the Torah portion, about Korach, what his misunderstanding was, although his intentions were great, and see how it plays on to what we've been saying about the tree of life. So I want to begin by sharing some thoughts on a sign that I saw, because you see, we have a real focus on unity at the moment, which is wonderful. Unity is what we all want at the very deepest level. I often speak about addiction and how addiction is a substitution for the unity that we're craving. The more I work on addiction, actually, the more I understand that at the root of addiction is some kind of problem with attachment. Very often an infant hasn't attached properly, or a young child hasn't attached properly to a primary caretaker, and then seeks the unity that they're yearning for with a substance. But ultimately, we want that unity, whether it's in an unhealthy way with a substance or in a healthy way with a relationship. It could also be in an unhealthy way with a relationship, because we want unity with our Creator. That is one of our deepest desires. And so I think that this focus, the global focus that we have on generating unity, is vital and a healthy thing. But it's not necessarily working in the way that we want. Are we more broken up and divided than we were 2 decades ago, for example? So the sign that I'm thinking of, the image that comes to mind at the beginning of this discussion, is the coexist sign, where the C is a sickle and the X, I think, is a Magen David, etc. The T is the cross. And the message of that sign is that everything is equally valuable. But that comes from a position of moral relativism. It's not really possible that everything in every religion is true, because there are contradictions in religions, meaning their principles, their premises contradict one another. And aiming for unity with that as a basis is not something that is going to get us to a place of actual unity on the ground. How do we go about it? So let's take a step back and look at our current global focus on unity, which, as I said, is something that I think is vital and healthy. But is it being done in the way that is most effective? For all of our efforts, we're less united than we previously were. I was looking for an image earlier. I don't know if it was today or yesterday. I searched on Pixabay, which has great images on tolerance and unity, and I was surprised that the predominance of images were LGBTQ images, rainbow images, which is not to say that I'm not giving any commentary now on the fact, on that notion of inclusion, but I was surprised that there wasn't more of a global sense of unity and tolerance. Or is tolerance, asking ourselves, does tolerance mean that I have to accept everything. If I don't accept every position, like as the coexist sign seems to suggest, if I don't accept that, am I an intolerant person, or even more than that, am I a bad person? I've personally experienced being on a college campus and saying something that the students didn't like, and then this very visceral and aggressive response of the students to my saying something that they felt challenged their personal safety. And I don't think that being in that place is healthy for any of us. God is our safe space. When we come from a place of a divine being who personally or supervises our lives personally, we are able to really create a holding space for others. But if we don't, if we're looking for some personally defined safe space, that's not really bringing us to a place of unity. And I experienced that in a very visceral way. You may be interested to look at someone by the name of Christina Hoff Sommers. I think she calls herself a factual feminist on Twitter, and she's on YouTube as well. And I remember a while ago watching a video of hers. I haven't seen too much of her content, but she spoke about being at a conference that was broken up into various groups, intersectionally divided groups, but how that didn't work, because once they broke up into the group, then there were subgroups that needed their own group, and then from those further subgroups. Something's not working in our desire for unity. So how does this all play out with regard to Torah? And I'll say at the get-go, it's not as simple as this group is right or correct. By right, I mean correct. And this one is wrong. What does Torah have to say about it? So what I'd like to do is share an image. For those of you who are joining us by phone, I'll include the image for you later. But what this image is a segment of the Tree of Life, which is the first of three of the emotional powers of the soul, the emotional attributes. And on the right of the tree, you've got Chesed. Its color, according to the Ramak, is blue, like the rising sun. And on the left, you have Gevurah, which is red. Gevurah means strength or severity and boundaries. And then at the bottom, in the center, the bottom of a triangle is Tiferet, beauty or harmony, and also truth. So these are our three primary emotions. Loving kindness. Love comes first, and then there is restraint and setting boundaries. And Tiferet, or beauty, truth, is also compassion. It's finding a place of balance between the left and the right. Now, what are these? I discuss them at great length in the method, in the Tree of Life module, and the module that speaks about healthy attributes as well. What are these really about? When you're looking at chesed, or loving kindness, it's about inclusion, because it's very much focused on expansion. You want to bring more in. You stretch yourself, and you are thereby including more of what's outside of you, and that's on the right. Gevurah is about restriction, setting limitations and boundaries, and that, as I said, is on the left. The middle point, the harmonious balance of both of those, is yellow. If you think about them, we've got the three primary colors. There's Chesed, blue, Gevurah, red, and Tiferet, yellow. Those are our three primary colors that subsequently create purple and orange and green, which are other attributes on the Tree of Life. What do these soul powers mean? How do they play out in our lives? My husband is from Russia, and he grew up grew up there, left at the age of 16 and went to live in Israel. And he once said something really interesting to me. He said the focus in Russia was on community and in America on individuality. And in his opinion, and I think he was accurate in this, Russia sacrificed, certainly when he was growing up during communist rule, sacrificed the individual for the well-being of the community, whereas in America, the focus on the individual sacrifices the notion of community. I have a friend who once commented on not talk shows, what are they? These live virtual reality shows where you go into other people's lives, and he was saying that in America, because there's so little community, people try and replicate the experience of community by virtually entering into other people's lives. So there's this balance that has to be attained. And we find in Torah that the reign of King Solomon is one where there was the best balance between community and individuality. We're told that during his reign, there wasn't a decision that was made on behalf of the collective group or community that compromised any individual, and there was no decision made on behalf of an individual that compromised the community. That's why he's symbolized by the number 15. He's the 15th from Abraham, and the number 15 is the 15th day of the month, which is when the moon is at its height and it's full. So the reign of King Solomon was like this full, shining, luminous moon reality where community and individuality, the group and personal responsibility and power were equally celebrated and balanced. Now, how does that play out in American politics itself? The way I understand it is that Democrats are connected to the right of the tree of life. That's why I say the left is right, not in the sense that the left is correct, which is not to say that many of the goals of Democrats are not correct. What I'm trying to point out over here as we're talking is that both the left and the right are essential. There's something that Democrats bring to social conversation and balance that is essential, and ditto for Republicans. So the Democrats, being on the right of the tree of life, want to expand. It's about love and inclusion, and their focus is unity and equality. And if you think about a graph, which may be a simpler way to look at this, even though here we've got right, left, and center. If you think about a graph that has the X horizontal axis and the Y vertical axis, the focus of chesed, loving kindness, or what is embodied by the Democratic Party would best be represented by the X-axis on the graph, because that X-axis is a focus on equality and unity and a focus on community. The opposite would be the case with the Republican Party, where they're best represented by the Y-axis on the graph. The Y-axis is going vertically top to bottom, and the souls of individuals who are connected to a Republican outlook are more leaning to, of course, we all have to have everything inside of ourselves, just as a man has inside of himself female and child, and so too does a woman have male and child. To be a healthy individual, we have to be addressing male, female, and child within each of us. So too, all of us have chesed and gevurah and tiferet, but what is our primary focus? So for the souls of individuals that are connected to align themselves with the Republican Party, they want order and hierarchy, and their focus on order and hierarchy brings an emphasis on individuality and personal responsibility. At some level, I would say the Tiferet is represented by independents who are watching. I once said to someone, I'm an observant Jew. I observe what's going on outside of me. I find it simplistic at some level to fall on this side or on that side. Also not necessarily an easy place to hang out. But we need both order and equality. We need the right of the tree of life, not the political right. By that I mean chesed, loving kindness, and what is embodied by the Democrats, to prevent a hierarchy that places some at the top and then others are unable to break free of their financial or social position. Think of a caste system as an extreme version of locking people into their respective positions. It's like, okay, well, you're part of the lower caste and you're going to just have to hang out there for the rest of your life and hope that in a forthcoming incarnation you'll be placed in a better social or hierarchical position. What the chesed souls, the right side of the tree of life souls, or the Democrats in this respect, want is to prevent that top-heavy hierarchy that disempowers others. On the other hand, we need the left, because the left here, the red, interestingly, the colors of the parties, the Democrats are blue, which is on the right of the tree of life, and the Republicans are on the, they are Gavura, which is on the left of the tree of life, and those colors respectively are blue and red. It's not enough just to want a horizontal equalizing of everyone. We have to have that focus on some kind of order and structure and a facilitating of personal accountability. That's embodied more by the orientation of the Republicans. And one sees it, I think, in terms of a focus on big government or smaller government. When you're looking at equalizing, then there's a focus on big government in the hope that this overarching body is going to create some kind of equality for all people. But when you're looking at personal responsibility, then you want a smaller kind of government. So that gives us just some kind of a sense of the backdrop for our discussion, and leaves us with the question, how do we create unity and simultaneously support true individuality that brings us back to the question that I posted, the original question I posted on Facebook was Korach, the original Democrat. So I'd like to take a step back and look at, just revisit for a couple of minutes some of the things that we spoke about in last week's class about the Torah portion of Shlach, the spies who went out to scout the land and bring their report back to Moses, and Moses' answer to those spies, because Korach, whom we'll introduce in a minute or two, had an understanding that grew out of Moshe's answer. It was a misunderstanding because of one particular factor, but he listened very carefully. He observed what happened. There were these spies, they went to scout the land, they came and brought their report back to the people. Fascinating to look at the discussion that happens there between the people and Moses, the spies, and Yehoshua, Joshua, and Caleb, the two spies who separated themselves from the other 10 in terms of political conversation. But that's not so much our focus for today. I want to just look at what was the misunderstanding of the spies and Moses' answer to them, which then led Korach to a particular understanding. Now, what we said is that the spies, they had witnessed the fact that God took the people out of Egypt. He turned the water of the Nile into blood, and he brought 10 subsequent plagues, freeing them from a land that no one had ever broken free of. I mean, if you want to talk about the archetype of social rebellion, it would be the Exodus from Egypt, a completely radical way of breaking out of limitations. And the spies witnessed that. They also experienced personally the crossing of the Sea of Reeds, which was an unnatural event. this opening of an ocean so that 3 million plus people could walk across in absolute comfort. And they had also experienced the giving of the Torah. So how was it possible that leaders of their own tribe would be able to say, God could do all of those miracles, but he cannot take us into the land? How was that possible at all? And the answer is that they misunderstood the way God relates to the world. They understood their perception was that God exists or functions, so to speak, beyond nature. In order for him to effect a miracle, to bring about a miracle, he has to break the laws of nature. And thus, if they were going to come into the land, there would have to be some miraculous occurrence that would bring the people across the Jordan River and into the Holy Land. They couldn't wrap their minds around the fact that God was going to act within the laws of nature. And Moses answered them and he said, you really got Mount Sinai and the giving of the Torah wrong. God is one. And what you have to do is erase your mental constructs, your conceptual barriers or preconceptions about how matter and spirit interact, about how heaven and earth interact. God is one. You know, often in the method, in coaching, live coaching with the groups, I speak about the fact that we strive to be spiritual. Whereas the real goal should be not spiritual, but godly. They're very different. God created spirituality and he created physicality. And being one or the other is not better. What's best is aligning ourselves with God's will and vision and purpose for creation. And that's what Moses was answering the spies and all the people. God is one, and try and shake off those old paradigms. They are not Jewish paradigms because there is this barrier set up in your mind between matter and spirit and heaven and earth. And what Korach did is take that lesson but to an extreme. He said, well, God is one, and what that means is that any kind of hierarchy has no place amongst the people. Korach believed in unity. He was an activist. He instituted a rebellion for the sake of his goals, and he was even ready to die for his cause. So he was a passionate person and a very lofty person. But his understanding was that given the principle of unity, there could be no distinctions. And so in reality, what that amounts to is not that he wanted unity, but uniformity. It's like a flatlining of reality that removes the subtlety and richness that comes from the balance between the X and Y axis, or the balance between Chesed and Gevurah. And I think that this is something that all of us are struggling with. So many times we find, whether it's on social media, in our own lives, there's an insistence on uniformity, when really what people want is unity. You know, in Hebrew, the word for one is echad, and that word is spelled aleph, chet, and daled. Aleph has a numerical value of 1, chet a numerical value of 8, and daled of 4. And we're taught that that stands for one God, 7 heavens and the earth is the number 8, and then on the earth, in a physical reality, we have the 4 compass directions, north, south, west, and east. Quite remarkable to think about unity in those terms, that unity is not singularity. It is the coming together of disparate entities. Otherwise, we have this flatlining, and I think that that really was Korach's mistake. And where did it come from? The way I understand it, based on the commentary of the sages, is that somewhere inside, Korach himself wanted to be the leader. The parsha starts, and we're told he challenged Moses, and he said, if you have a garment that is entirely blue techelet? Do you need tzitzit, the fringes that hang from that garment? Now, originally in the tzitzit, although it's not that way today, these are the fringes that have to hang from a four-cornered garment if a male wears that. Originally, a thread in those tzitzit had to be blue. Why? Because the blue reminds us of the ocean of the sky of the throne of glory and the throne of glory of God. So one would look at this blue and be reminded of one's creator. There's a fascinating story told in the Talmud about a man who went to see a prostitute and at the last minute withdrew himself from the interaction because he was wearing tzitzit and they flapped across his eye. And there you have it. It reminded him of the ocean, of the sky, the throne of glory, and the creator, and he was able to pull himself away. That story is really fascinating, and many teachings that come out from it. So at the beginning of this week's parsha, what Korach does is challenge Moses, and he says to him, why do you raise yourself amongst the people? And Rashi tells us that one of the questions that he presented was, look, in a garment that is all techelet, all this beautiful blue, like a sky blue, do you need the tzitzit? Because the garment's already reminding you of the blue, which has its own sequential flow. Obviously, the law is that even if you have a garment that is all blue, you still need the tzitzit. That's that kind of uniformity instead of the unity. And what allowed for that mistake is a desire, a personal desire, an egocentric drive, which was that he himself would be the leader. It's so subtle. So many times we're pushing an agenda, and it could be a wonderful agenda, but if we look at ourselves, if we're really honest, if we get quiet and look inside, what we find is that there's some ego drive there that is pushing me to push this particular agenda. Additionally, and I'll conclude with this, who God is beyond our capacity to understand. He's described as nimna nimnaot, the contradiction of contradictions. Isn't that remarkable? Like, God is the place where all order originates from, but at the same time, when we try to wrap our minds around the Creator, it's impossible for us to do. No thought can grasp him at all. And therefore, we have to live with this understanding that, God is the source of all unity, and yet there is still a place for hierarchy and order. And that is why next week's Torah portion is chukas. Chukas are, I think they in English called statutes. There are laws that are rationally understandable, like don't murder and don't steal. And then there are laws called edus. So those first category of laws in Hebrew are called mishpatim. They're civil laws. And then we have edut. Edut are testimonials, which are laws governing holidays, festivals, the Sabbath, etc. We wouldn't have come upon them with our own mind, but once we know about them, they make rational sense. And then there is a third category, which is chukat. Chukat is a chok, it's like a decree, something that is beyond my capacity to understand. The classic example of that is the red heifer, that if someone had contracted impurity, a spiritual state of impurity by coming into contact with a dead body, that they would have to have water mixed with some ashes of the red heifer sprinkled over them, and they would thereby become pure. But one of the priests that was involved in the preparation of those ashes himself would become impure. That's such a contradiction. Why is it that someone who is serving to purify another thereby becomes impurified. And that's the Torah portion that follows Parshas Korach, because just as Korach's question grew out of the misunderstanding of the spies, so too the laws of the decrees grow out, so to speak, of Korach's misunderstanding. All right, folks, so there you have it for today, a little bit of Kabbalah on contemporary politics and what it has to do with our lives today. I hope that you enjoyed it and feel that you have something to take away. It was great connecting with you, and we'll see you next week.